What would you think if I told you that the greatest obsessions of a man are not the things he dares to pursue, but the things he secretly fears he cannot possess? In Carl Jung's most important book, The Red Book, there lies a confession that few truly understand. Beneath its cryptic visions and mythic symbols is not just a spiritual exploration, it is the anatomy of masculine desire, fear, and longing. It is the silent mapping of forbidden obsessions, obsessions that linger in the unconscious like ghosts of choices never made. And at the heart of this labyrinth is one shadowy truth. The woman a man cannot forget becomes the architecture of his inner torment. For most women, desire seems simple on the surface: affection, connection, security. But for men, desire often decays into obsession because it carries with it the unbearable weight of the unattainable feminine. Jung called this the anima, the woman within his psyche. And when a man fails to integrate her, she appears in his waking life as the woman he chases but cannot claim, the woman who leaves him spiraling in silence long after she's gone. Some women sense this energy instinctively. Have you ever wondered why certain men disappear only to reappear years later, haunted by a memory they can't escape? Or why some men fall into marriages, careers, or spiritual disciplines, not because they have found peace, but because they are trying to bury a desire they cannot fulfill? It is not love they are running from. It is the confrontation with their own shadow, the dark mirror of desire. In the Red Book, Jung writes of Philemon, the wise old man who guides him through the unconscious. But before Philemon appears, Jung is swallowed by visions of chaos, of blood, of longing. He meets Salome, the feminine seductress who blinds the prophet Elijah in his dreams. Why Salome? Why this symbol? Because Jung knew that desire, when denied, does not dissolve. It festers into obsession. And this is the first hidden obsession his work reveals: the obsession with control over desire itself. Men are taught to master everything: business, status, even their own emotions. But desire is not something you conquer. It is something you understand, integrate, and then transcend. The man who cannot do this becomes a prisoner of his projections. He obsesses not over the woman herself, but over the version of her he has created in his mind. The woman he believes will soothe his ache, but who in reality only mirrors his unhealed wound. The second obsession is more dangerous. It is the obsession with spiritual bypassing. Have you seen this? The man who meditates daily, reads Stoic philosophy, perhaps even studies Jung himself, but underneath he is not at peace. He is avoiding the work, the deep work, the work of confronting why he desires what he cannot have. He replaces intimacy with ascension. He turns vulnerability into abstraction. He escapes into ideas because facing the actual woman, the real, breathing, boundary-setting woman, terrifies him. She has the power to reject him. The spiritual pursuit becomes his camouflage, but underneath, the hunger remains. And then comes the third obsession, the obsession with regret. This one arrives silently, often after 40, sometimes later. Jung wrote, "Life begins at 40, the age when you realize it's all a giant dream." For many men, this realization comes with a brutal clarity. They see the moments they let pass, the woman they loved but never told, the chances they had but never took, the apologies they withheld because their pride could not kneel. And so they live in silent obsession, not with the woman herself, but with the phantom of the choice they never made. Do you know how many women are living inside men's regrets right now? How many are silently haunting the corridors of masculine consciousness, not because they meant to, but because the man could not face his own shadow when she stood before him? This is why the Red Book is not just about spiritual awakening. It's about desire, repression, and the dangerous consequences of silence. It teaches a lesson most men will never say aloud. If you avoid the woman who activates your soul, you will obsess over her in the unconscious for the rest of your life. And for women, understanding this is not about manipulation, it's about awareness. It's about knowing that sometimes, when a man pulls away, it is not because you did something wrong. It is because you triggered his deepest confrontation with himself. You became the mirror he wasn't ready to face. Most women never realize when they've become the symbol of a man's inner conflict. She thinks he simply lost interest, or perhaps she wasn't enough. But the truth is far more complex. Often, she has awakened in him a forbidden obsession, a desire so tied to his shadow that he cannot face it without dismantling the false persona he has spent decades constructing. Carl Jung understood this intimately. In the Red Book, his spiritual diary, Jung didn't just catalog visions of mystical beings and cosmic landscapes. He chronicled encounters with his own darkness, desires he could neither ignore nor fulfill in the conventional sense. He met figures like Salome, who symbolized sensuality, danger, and the feminine mystery that refuses to be domesticated. This was not a passive observation. It was an initiation into the truth that desire is not clean, nor is it safe. It demands that a man surrender his egoic control and descend into the underworld of his own unconscious. Some men cannot do this. They compartmentalize, rationalize, intellectualize. They choose order over chaos, logic over longing, control over connection, but in doing so, they create an inner split. The more they suppress, the more the shadow grows teeth. It starts to devour them from within, through sleepless nights, silent obsessions, and private moments of collapse when no one is watching. Have you ever sensed this in a man? His coldness was not indifference, it was terror. His silence wasn't peace, it was paralysis. You became too close to his unconscious wounds. You stood in the doorway of his deepest need, and he chose to close the door rather than step through it. Not because you were wrong, but because you were real. Jung called this the projection of the anima. It is when a man projects his idealized feminine onto a woman, seeing her not as she is, but as the sacred image he both desires and fears. He wants her to heal him, but he also resents her for having the power to do so. He chases her in his mind, but avoids her in reality. He wants the fantasy of the goddess, but cannot tolerate the reality of the woman who might say no. This is where the obsession begins. It is not about you. It is about what you represent, the part of him he cannot claim. And when a woman unknowingly activates this projection, she becomes lodged in his unconscious as a symbol of unfinished transformation. He cannot forget her because forgetting her would mean forgetting a piece of his own soul, so he keeps her there, in memory, in music, in silence. Every song becomes a haunting. Every moment of solitude becomes a ritual of longing. She becomes his myth, his muse, his regret. Some women internalize this and blame themselves. They think, maybe if I had stayed longer, explained more, loved harder. But that is not the path of feminine empowerment. The empowered woman understands this. You were never meant to complete his journey. You were meant to awaken it. Jung wrote of individuation, the lifelong process of becoming whole. For men, this often means facing the anima without collapsing into her or fleeing from her. It means integrating desire without allowing it to become obsession. But few men can do this easily. It requires dismantling their ego, questioning their identity, and risking rejection not just by women, but by their own inner critic. And for women, the lesson is just as profound. You must know the difference between being loved for who you are and being worshipped as a projection of someone else's unfulfilled needs. When a man fixates on you but cannot meet you authentically, he is not offering love. he is offering obsession disguised as devotion. Can you feel the weight of that distinction? One leads to growth. The other leads to cycles of emotional confusion, distance, and regret. Carl Jung's writings reveal that all unintegrated desire becomes shadow, and shadow, when denied, returns as obsession. But here is the secret no one tells you. Obsession is not love. It is the echo of an avoided transformation. If a man cannot face the mirror you place before him, he will run from you, but he will never forget you. Not because you did something wrong, but because you stood too close to his awakening. And so, the woman who lives in the center of a man's forbidden desire must choose wisely. She can play the role he projects onto her and be consumed by his fantasy. Or she can step back, remain sovereign, and let him walk his own path toward wholeness. This is not cruelty, it is wisdom. Because in the end, desire is meant to lead to growth, not captivity. Some women, once they realize they've become the object of a man's secret obsession, feel a dangerous temptation. The temptation to stay in his life, not as herself, but as the symbol he wants her to be. To keep feeding his projections, to maintain the role of the unattainable muse, the ethereal goddess, the emotional siren he cannot quite possess. But this, too, is a form of spiritual death. Because the woman who lives inside his unfinished dreams is not living in her own reality. She is trapped in his, becoming a phantom in someone else's psychological labyrinth. Jung warned of this. He knew that when a man projects his anima onto a woman, he risks turning her into a character in his inner drama instead of respecting her autonomy. And the woman, if unaware of this dynamic, might start to mistake his obsession for real connection. She might believe his longing is about her soul when in fact, it is about his missing pieces. This is why obsession feels both flattering and imprisoning. One moment, you are the center of his universe. The next, you are suffocated by his need for you to remain exactly as he imagines you. Mystical, distant, perfect, untouched by real life. You are not allowed to have flaws, to change, to disappoint him. You must stay forever in the role he assigned you. But feminine power does not come from staying frozen in a man's psyche. It comes from knowing when to step out of his dreams and walk boldly into your own life. Have you ever noticed how many men secretly crave the woman they cannot have? Not because they truly love her, but because she represents the part of themselves they cannot integrate. She is their mirror, their missing archetype. She evokes the sensual and the sacred, the maternal and the forbidden, the nurturing and the wild. This is why so many men keep silent about their deepest desires. They are ashamed of them. Desire feels like weakness. Vulnerability feels like exposure. And exposure threatens the carefully curated image they show the world. The successful man, the stoic leader, the one who never loses control. But control is an illusion. Jung wrote that repression only feeds the shadow. The more a man denies his longing, the more that longing turns into obsession. And obsession is not a choice. It is a possession of the psyche. So what happens when you, as a woman, become the carrier of his forbidden longing? You become the unresolved symbol in his personal myth. He may not call you. He may not chase you openly. But he thinks of you when the world is silent. He dreams of you when the masks fall away. You are the ache beneath his ambition, the ghost behind his perfectionism, the feminine image that surfaces when he can no longer outrun his loneliness. And yet the cruel paradox is this: the more he obsesses, the less capable he is of loving you in reality. Because real love requires seeing you clearly, not as the goddess in his fantasy, but as a woman with your own needs, boundaries, and desires. Jung called this process individuation, the breaking apart of projections, the dissolution of ego, the painful but necessary confrontation with one's own unconscious. For a man to truly love a woman, he must first meet her as herself, not as an extension of his inner void. But few men are ready for this. They cling to the myth because the myth feels safer than the mirror. So where does that leave you? It leaves you with power. The power to decide whether you will keep playing the role he imagines, or whether you will step away from the fantasy and into the fullness of your own life. It leaves you with the choice to embody real feminine energy, not the passive muse, but the active, conscious woman who knows her worth. You are not here to be worshipped from afar. You are not here to soothe a man's unhealed boyhood wounds. You are not here to stay silent so that he can remain comfortable in his illusions. You are here to live fully, to love wisely, to detach gracefully. Because when you understand how projection works, you stop personalizing a man's obsession. You see it for what it is, a sign of his own unfinished journey, not a reflection of your value. And sometimes, the most compassionate thing you can do is let him keep his fantasy while you walk away with your reality intact. This is not cruelty, it is liberation. Because in the end, the woman who knows herself is not haunted by the shadows of men who cannot meet her depth. She moves beyond the role of muse and becomes the creator of her own myth. She no longer waits for him to integrate his anima. She integrates her own animus. She stands whole. The woman who understands this becomes unforgettable, not because she played the perfect part, but because she chose her soul over someone else's story. Desire in its rawest form is rarely about the object desired. It's about the longing to complete something fractured within. Carl Jung knew this better than most. He spent his life mapping the secret geographies of the human soul, tracing the forbidden intersections of eros, shadow, and the unconscious. What most people think of as love, Jung might have called projection. When a man desires a woman beyond reason, when he finds himself pulled into silent obsession, it is often not her essence that he longs for. It is his own missing pieces, reflected back through her form. She becomes a portal to his depths, but he mistakes her for the prize rather than the mirror. This is why so many relationships are born out of attraction but die in resentment. The fantasy eventually collapses under the weight of reality. The woman cannot remain the symbol forever. She breathes, she changes, she disappoints. And when she does, the man who projected his anima onto her feels betrayed, not by her but by his own unconscious expectations. Jung wrote of this phenomenon extensively. He warned of the dangers when a man confuses his own soul work with a woman's love. The forbidden desires, the ones he cannot confess out loud, are usually not about her at all. They are about his hunger for wholeness, his need to reconcile the divine feminine inside himself. But many men are terrified of this task. They would rather chase the woman who embodies the archetype than confront the archetype directly within their own psyche. They would rather burn silently in longing than risk the death of ego that true integration requires. And so obsession becomes a substitute for transformation. If you are a woman who has felt the burn of this silent obsession directed toward you, you know exactly what it feels like. His eyes linger too long. His energy clings to you in rooms where no words are spoken. He might not admit it. He might not pursue you openly, but you can feel it. The weight of his unfinished desire lives in the air between you. It's intoxicating, isn't it? To be the forbidden thought in someone's mind. To be the woman he thinks of when no one is watching. To be the symbol of something he craves but cannot claim. But be careful, obsession is not love, and longing is not commitment. You are not here to carry his projections on your back. Some women spend years trapped in this dynamic, half loved, half haunted. They become addicted to the power of being wanted, but starved for the reality of being truly met. The woman who lives in his dreams is often lonely in real life, because while he chases the image of her, he forgets to touch her humanity. And yet, you can break the cycle. You can step out of his shadow and into your own light. You can remind yourself, You were not born to be a placeholder for someone else's self-actualization. You were not made to be the muse of a man too afraid to meet his own reflection. If a man cannot sit with his own shadow, he will project it onto you. If he cannot face his inner feminine, he will make you responsible for it. He will call you the cause of his ache, when really, you are just the trigger for what was always there. But there is a difference between being desired and being respected. There is a difference between being fantasized about and being loved in reality. Jung's work teaches us this. The deeper you go into yourself, the less likely you are to confuse projection with connection. The more shadow work you do, the less tempted you become to play roles in someone else's unresolved drama. Some women stay trapped in the dance of obsession because they confuse his longing with validation. They believe that if he wants them enough, it must mean they are worthy. But true worth is not found in someone else's fixation. It is found in the quiet power of knowing who you are, regardless of who desires you. There is a haunting beauty in being the woman who awakens a man's forbidden desire. But there is even greater beauty in being the woman who does not need to be wanted in order to feel whole. Let him have his silent obsession if he must. Let him wrestle with the parts of himself he has yet to meet. You, on the other hand, have deeper work to do. You have your own shadows to integrate, your own desires to explore, your own life to live, not as a symbol in someone else's psyche, but as the sovereign architect of your own existence. Because in the end, the most dangerous woman is not the one who triggers a man's obsession. It is the one who refuses to be consumed by it. The woman who walks away from projection and into reality becomes something unforgettable, not because she fed his fantasy, but because she chose her own freedom over his fixation. There is an ancient ache that lives beneath the surface of male desire, a hunger not just for a woman's body, but for the transcendent experience of union with his own anima. Carl Jung understood this better than most. He knew that desire, when left unconscious, becomes a labyrinth, a place where men wander in circles, mistaking outer women for inner salvation. In the Red Book, his most personal and mystical work, Jung confesses this journey. He speaks of visions and dreams, where the feminine appears as both guide and temptation, healer and destroyer. The anima is not just a gentle muse. She is also the dark mother, the siren who drags him into the depths, the seductress who forces him to confront the parts of himself he cannot control. This is where obsession begins. In the refusal to integrate the feminine within, a man projects it outward. He seeks it in lovers, in affairs, in fantasies that haunt him when the room is silent. But no woman can carry the weight of his unmet psyche forever. The first forbidden desire is this: the longing to be mothered by a lover. Many men, no matter how strong or successful, secretly ache to be seen without armor. They desire a woman who will hold them in a way the world never could. They want nurturing, softness, the unconditional acceptance they were denied in childhood. But when this desire is hidden in shame, it mutates into neediness, obsession, or silent resentment. A woman feels this when she becomes his emotional caretaker rather than his equal. She senses it when he places her on a pedestal, not because he respects her wholeness, but because he needs her to heal the mother wound he won't admit exists. This is not love. It is dependency in disguise. And it never ends well, because the moment she steps off the pedestal, the moment she asserts her boundaries, he feels betrayed, not by her actions, but by the collapse of his fantasy. She was supposed to fix him. She was supposed to be perfect. She wasn't supposed to remind him of his wounds, but healing is not her job. The second forbidden desire is even more dangerous: the craving for domination masked as attraction. When a man has not reconciled his own power, he becomes addicted to control. Sometimes this shows up sexually, sometimes emotionally. He might appear distant, aloof, or emotionally unavailable, not because he doesn't feel, but because he fears surrendering to vulnerability. In his mind, desire becomes a game of control. He chases, withdraws, returns, repeats. He creates cycles of intensity followed by silence. He leaves you guessing, addicted to the highs and lows, wondering what you did wrong when really you did nothing at all. He is not rejecting you, he is rejecting his own powerlessness. For men trapped in this dynamic, the feminine represents both danger and salvation. She can destroy his ego by making him feel things he cannot rationalize. She can unravel his carefully constructed persona by awakening sensations he cannot predict. And so he tries to dominate what he cannot integrate. But true power is not control. It is surrender. And until a man learns this, his relationships will be battlegrounds, not sanctuaries. The third forbidden desire is the most haunting of all, the unconscious longing for annihilation disguised as love. Jung called this the confrontation with the self, the ultimate dissolving of ego boundaries. Some men, when faced with deep attraction, feel a terror they cannot explain. To merge with another at the soul level means to die to who they were before. And death, even symbolic, is terrifying. So they sabotage intimacy. They run. They betray. They destroy the thing they love most. Not because they do not want it, but because they are not ready to become someone new. A woman on the receiving end of this feels it as betrayal, but it is not always personal. Sometimes it is existential. He does not know how to become the man he needs to be to hold what he desires, and so he destroys it before it transforms him. But here's the secret no one tells you. You do not have to be his transformation. You do not have to carry his shadows, heal his mother wound, or survive his power games. Your work is to see the game without playing it, to recognize projection without feeding it, to remain in your center even when he circles you, like a man lost in a dream he cannot wake from. Because the woman who refuses to collapse into a man's forbidden desires becomes something different. She becomes the mirror he cannot break, the truth he cannot unsee, the portal to his own awakening, not because she saves him, but because she chooses herself. And that, in the end, is the most dangerous thing of all. Some women wonder why men often come back long after they've left, why they return months or even years later, carrying apologies wrapped in silence, speaking in riddles about regret, timing, and unfinished business. The answer lies not in the surface-level games of modern dating, but deep in the architecture of the male unconscious, a place Carl Jung mapped with brutal honesty. When a man encounters a woman who embodies both softness and boundary, allure and mystery, he experiences something that cannot be processed through logic alone. She becomes for him a symbol, a living projection of his own anima, the feminine part of his soul he has not yet integrated. And if he is not ready to meet that part of himself, he will retreat, often without explanation. This is not weakness. It is psychological overwhelm. Jung called this process enantiodromia, the tendency for things to turn into their opposite. Love becomes fear. Desire becomes retreat. Closeness becomes distance. And the woman, left in confusion, wonders if she did something wrong. She did not. She simply touched something too deep. For many men, this depth triggers a crisis, a confrontation with parts of themselves they have avoided for years. In her presence, he feels seen in ways he cannot control. He feels vulnerable beyond his training, and the ego, programmed for control and survival, recoils. That is why obsession follows silence. The men who ghost often become the men who stalk her Instagram at 2 a.m. They remember the sound of her laugh in places they cannot name. They replay conversations in the spaces between their daily tasks. She lives in his mind, not because she was ordinary, but because she became a symbol of the work he left unfinished. This is where desire turns dark. In Jungian psychology, Symbols are not casual. They are catalysts. They represent something larger than life, and when a woman becomes a man's anima projection, she is no longer just herself. She becomes his lost feminine, his shadow, his doorway to wholeness. But most men are not taught to handle this. Instead, they chase lesser distractions. They pursue women who are easier, safer, or more compliant, not because those women are better, but because they do not threaten his current identity. The true feminine, the woman who triggers growth, feels dangerous. She is not just a lover, she is initiation. And initiation always comes with sacrifice. This is why Carl Jung warned against confusing attraction with possession. When a man tries to possess what should be integrated, he creates cycles of obsession. He wants the woman, but more than that, he wants the feeling she gives him, the glimpse of his own unconscious, the soft mirror of his emotional soul. But mirrors are not meant to be owned. They are meant to be gazed into, studied, and respected. If he's lucky, he realizes this before it's too late. If he's not, he repeats the pattern. He turns love into longing. He turns attraction into games. He turns silence into strategy, thinking he can manipulate fate. But life does not play by those rules, and neither does the deep feminine. So what happens to the woman in this story? She stands at the threshold of a difficult choice. She can collapse into his projection and become what he wants her to be: caretaker, rescuer, fantasy. Or she can remain rooted in herself, knowing that his work is his own. She can love without losing herself. She can witness his shadows without becoming the container for them. Most women never learn this skill. They are taught to heal, fix, or wait. But the empowered feminine knows better. She does not chase closure from men who do not know how to give it. She does not shrink to make herself more digestible. She does not lower her frequency to meet a man where his ego feels safe. Instead, she becomes the woman who lives in his unfinished dreams. She is the lesson he cannot bypass, the echo he cannot silence, the silent presence that forces him to ask harder questions about his own soul. And here's the paradox. When she chooses herself, when she walks away from obsession and into sovereignty, she becomes even more unforgettable. Not because she played games, but because she played none at all. She allowed him to meet himself through her presence, and then she withdrew, not out of punishment, but out of purpose. Because some love is meant to awaken, not to soothe. Some women are not meant to be held. They are meant to be remembered. Most women underestimate the power of absence. They think their value comes from being constantly available, perpetually understanding, endlessly forgiving. But in depth psychology, especially in the work of Carl Jung, absence is often more potent than presence. It is the empty space that drives the male unconscious into confrontation with itself. When she steps away, not out of bitterness, but out of deep feminine alignment, he feels it not just in his heart, but in his psyche. Her absence becomes a symbol of what he could not contain, could not integrate, could not rise to meet. And so she lives in his mind as the one that got away, but more dangerously, as the one who exposed his unconscious wounds. Carl Jung wrote that a man's fate is determined not by what he knows, but by what he refuses to know. And nothing reveals this refusal more than the way men handle desire. Desire is not just about wanting someone. It is about confronting one's own longing for completion. And in men, this longing often gets projected onto women. She becomes the missing piece, the answer to his loneliness, the cure for his internal exile. But no woman can fill a hole that belongs to a man's own soul. This is the first hidden obsession: projection. He does not desire her purely as herself. He desires her as his savior, his muse, his emotional repair. And when she fails to live up to the fantasy, he feels betrayed, not by her, but by his own psyche. This is where regret begins to form. Regret is not born from rejection. It is born from the realization that he used another person as a mirror for his own emptiness. And when the mirror shatters, when she walks away or refuses the role he unconsciously assigned, he is left alone with his reflection, raw, unprotected, unmasked. Most men are not prepared for this. In the silence that follows, obsession takes root. He checks her last seen status, rereads old texts, imagines scenarios where she might reach out first. But this is not love. It is a symptom of unprocessed shadow, a dance between ego and unconscious, where the woman becomes less of a person and more of an archetype. She is the reminder of his work left undone. The second hidden obsession is control. When desire feels overwhelming, control becomes the antidote. Many men respond to feminine mystery not by leaning into humility, but by trying to manage it. They create rules, play mind games, or disappear altogether, thinking distance will erase the emotional imprint. But it never does, because the feminine that touched his unconscious cannot be silenced through logic. She cannot be erased by deleting a number or blocking a profile. She lives in the deepest part of his memory, the part that ties emotion to identity. Carl Jung called this the realm of the complex. A complex is not just a psychological pattern. It is an emotional charge wired into the nervous system. And once a woman becomes part of a man's emotional complex, she is not easily forgotten. She becomes the unfinished page in his inner narrative, the unresolved chapter. This is why some men will remember one woman for a lifetime, not because she was the most beautiful or the most giving, but because she represented a confrontation with his own inner void. The third hidden obsession is the most dangerous: redemption. After the projection fails and the control collapses, many men turn to redemption fantasies. They imagine scenarios where they win her back, where they prove their worth, where they rewrite the past. But often, these fantasies are less about love and more about repairing the ego. He doesn't just want her back. He wants back the version of himself he lost when she left. This is why obsession persists, because it is no longer about the woman. It is about the man's unfinished self, his unclaimed shadow, his unexplored anima. And here is where the empowered woman must tread carefully. She can become a participant in his redemption arc, sacrificing her own peace to soothe his wounds. Or she can remain in her sovereignty, understanding that his healing is not her assignment. She is not his therapist. She is not his spiritual crutch. She is not the woman who saves him from his own darkness. She is the woman who awakened it and then walked away. This is the highest form of feminine power. Not manipulation, not control, but graceful detachment. A refusal to collapse into roles that do not honor her own path. Because true feminine energy is not about softening for the sake of male comfort. It is about standing in emotional truth, no matter how uncomfortable that truth becomes. The woman who knows this becomes unforgettable, not because she tried to be, but because she refused to betray herself. And the man? He will remember her, not as the one who broke him, but as the one who revealed his hidden obsessions, the desires he never spoke out loud. Most women underestimate the seductive gravity of the male unconscious. They believe that love will keep him close, that nurturing will soften his ego, that loyalty will prevent his wandering mind. But in depth psychology, particularly in Jung's darkest contemplations, desire is not so easily tamed. It is not linear. It is not rational. It is archetypal. Desire lives in the shadow. And when a woman steps into a man's life with depth, complexity, and mystery, she awakens not just his longing, but his disorientation. She triggers the oldest parts of his psyche, the child who was neglected, the teenager who was humiliated, the adult who still believes that success will finally make him whole. Carl Jung warned us, every desire carries with it a shadow of regret, because every time a man reaches outward for completion, he neglects the inner confrontation required for true individuation. He wants the woman, but he also wants to avoid himself. And therein lies the conflict that turns attraction into obsession. A man may chase a woman because she fascinates him, but he obsesses over her because she threatens his self-image. She reflects back to him the parts he has not yet integrated. This is why Jung's most important work speaks of the anima, not just as a romantic ideal, but as a psychological force. The anima is the inner feminine, the emotional mirror, the unconscious muse. And when a real woman resembles the anima archetype too closely, the man cannot help but fall under her spell. But it is not really her he falls for. It is his own soul projected onto her. This projection creates a dangerous dependency. She becomes the symbol of everything he has not yet healed. Her attention soothes his insecurity. Her silence triggers his abandonment wound. Her independence activates his control complex, and every interaction becomes emotionally loaded, charged with meaning far beyond the surface. This is where regret is born. Not because she left, but because she saw him. Not the polished version, not the social mask. She saw the man beneath the man, the unfinished being, the boy in a man's body, the ego pretending to be whole. And when she walks away, or when the fantasy crumbles, he is left with himself. This is the unspoken agony that men rarely articulate. They say, "I miss her." But what they really mean is, "I miss who I thought I was when she loved me." They say, "I can't stop thinking about her." But what they really mean is, "I can't stop confronting the version of me that she exposed." This is why some men spiral after love ends, not because the woman was cruel, but because she became a portal to the unconscious. She stirred the waters of his deepest self, and now he cannot return to ignorance. Carl Jung wrote that the greatest danger to the human psyche is not evil, but unconsciousness. And nothing activates consciousness faster than desire denied. Most men are not taught to handle rejection with grace. They are taught to chase harder, control more, or numb out. But what if rejection is not a punishment? What if it is the beginning of psychological growth? This is what depth psychology whispers. Desire is not meant to be fulfilled at all costs. Sometimes desire exists to show you where you are empty, where you are fragmented, where you are still in shadow. And the feminine, especially when she is spiritual, enigmatic, or unattainable, becomes the catalyst for this revelation. She is not just a lover, she is an initiator. She initiates the man into his own inner work, his own darkness, his own longing. And the tragedy for many men is that they do not realize this until she is gone. That is why he obsesses. That is why he replays conversations in his mind, imagines scenarios where things went differently, scrolls through memories as if they were pages in an unfinished novel. He does not want her back. He wants back the moment before he knew himself, before she handed him the mirror, before she revealed the gap between who he pretends to be and who he actually is. And yet, the empowered woman does not shrink from this role. She does not apologize for being the one who triggered his awakening, nor does she carry guilt for his discomfort. Because to truly embody the feminine is not to be easy or convenient. It is to be transformative. And transformation is rarely comfortable. So she chooses her path, not out of cruelty, but out of deep alignment with her own growth. She lets him go, not because she lacks love, but because she refuses to betray herself to rescue him from his own reflection. And in doing so, she becomes part of his myth, the chapter he cannot close, the desire he cannot silence, the memory he cannot rewrite. Because some women do not just touch a man's life, they fracture his illusion. And that is a gift, whether he knows it or not. When Carl Jung wrote of the anima and the shadow, he was not crafting poetry, he was documenting human torment. He understood that love is not merely about affection, nor is desire simply about possession. These are games of the ego. But obsession is the cry of the unconscious. It is not the woman herself who haunts him. It is the unmet self she represents. In his most essential writings, Jung hinted at 3 forbidden desires, though he never named them so directly. Yet if you read between the lines of his most important book, the Red Book, the clues are there, pulsing between the passages like soft thunder. The first forbidden desire is for complete control over another's emotions. This is the silent craving no man will admit, to be the axis of a woman's world, to be her center of gravity, her sun, her moon, her inevitable thought. On the surface, he says he wants freedom and connection. But beneath the surface, in the shadow, he desires dominance over her inner life. He wants to be the melody stuck in her head, the phantom behind her silence, the reason she cannot sleep. But when a woman is sovereign, when she chooses herself over him, this forbidden desire is denied. And it is in that denial that the seed of obsession is planted. Some women do not orbit. Some women do not surrender their center to a man's gravitational pull. And to the man whose ego is unprepared for this, her detachment feels like death. This leads to the second forbidden desire, the yearning for the feminine to heal what the masculine refuses to face. Most men have never been taught to hold emotional pain without outsourcing it. They seek the woman not just for love, but for anesthesia. Her affection numbs the ache of existence. Her gaze temporarily silences the voice of inner inadequacy. Her body becomes the temple, where he escapes his own reflection. But when the woman evolves, when she steps into her spiritual femininity, she no longer volunteers for this role. She no longer allows herself to be the man's emotional medic. She stops mothering his wounds and starts honoring her own. And that for him feels like betrayal. Even though it is not betrayal, it is growth. The third forbidden desire is the most dangerous of all, the longing to merge with the anima without doing the work of individuation. Jung warned of this directly. The anima is not meant to be captured in flesh. She is a symbol of the man's own lost soul. But most men do not understand this. They see a woman with mystery in her eyes, detachment in her voice, and depth in her silence, and they believe, on some unconscious level, that if they can just have her, they will finally be whole. But no woman can complete a man's spiritual journey for him. When she refuses to play this role, the man spirals. He believes she has wronged him, when in fact, she has freed him from the illusion of salvation through romance, from the fantasy of being rescued from himself by another. And yet he will mourn her as if she died. This is the part most people never speak aloud. A man may live decades haunted by the woman who refused to let him use her as an escape. He may move on, marry someone else, start a new life. But in the quiet moments, in the spaces between obligations, he will return to her in his mind. Not because she was perfect, not because she loved him unconditionally, but because she became the mirror he could not shatter. The forbidden desires remain unspoken, but they do not disappear. They sit beneath the surface of every male-female dynamic, waiting for the one woman who triggers their activation. And when she does, she carries a burden few understand. It is not easy to be the woman who refuses to heal a man by sacrificing herself. It is not comfortable to be the one who says no when his ego demands yes. But this is the path of the empowered feminine. She does not exist to complete him. She exists to complete herself. And if he cannot meet her there, she will let him fall back into his own depths where he belongs. Not as punishment, but as invitation. Because true transformation is never delivered by someone else. It is self-earned, shadow-faced, ego dismantled, desire purified. And until a man accepts this, he will keep chasing women he cannot possess, reliving stories he cannot rewrite, and obsessing over moments he cannot control. This is what Carl Jung's deepest work reveals, not just in theory, but in life, in love, in loss. Most women, at some point, encounter a man trapped in this invisible battle, a man split between his conscious persona and his forbidden desires. He smiles, he woos, he performs confidence like a well-rehearsed script. But beneath the surface, his unconscious whispers a secret. He does not just want her presence. He wants her to be the cure for his existential ache. Carl Jung warned of this in his most intimate explorations of depth psychology. In the Red Book, he describes a descent, a confrontation with the self that no romantic partner can substitute. But the modern man, conditioned by conquest and ego inflation, still believes he can bypass this inner journey by attaching to the woman who reflects his anima. This is why the man obsessed with the feminine mystique often cannot articulate his own suffering. He believes his hunger is about her eyes, her voice, her silence, her refusal. But the truth is sharper. His hunger is for his own lost parts, and no woman, no matter how loving or present, can return those to him. The woman who becomes the object of such obsession often feels it in her body first, before her mind catches up. A tightening in the chest when he texts late at night. A subtle dread before the phone call. A sense of being devoured, not loved, because it is not love he is seeking. It is absolution. He wants her to erase his regret without him facing it. He wants her to rescue him from his shadow without him integrating it. And when she refuses, she becomes both goddess and villain in his psyche, the Madonna and the betrayer, the angel who could have saved him but chose not to. But the empowered feminine does not choose to save men from themselves. She chooses to hold the boundary, knowing that false compassion only feeds the male ego's addiction to comfort. And comfort, Jung teaches, is the enemy of transformation. This is why the woman who loves with depth often feels alone in her strength. She sees the truth before he does. She senses his projections before he names them. She carries the double burden of knowing his potential while watching him sabotage it. And yet she still chooses to step back, not from cruelty, but from wisdom. The Stoics knew this too. Seneca wrote, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." But the man gripped by obsession cannot separate his imagination from his soul. He creates a narrative where she is the villain, because it is easier than admitting he is stuck in his own inner labyrinth. Jung's depth psychology reveals this cycle again and again: projection, possession, obsession, collapse. First, he projects the anima onto her, believing she is his missing piece. Then, he attempts to possess her, not physically perhaps, but emotionally, spiritually, energetically. When she resists, his ego shatters into obsession. He cannot control the narrative, and this creates a wound deeper than rejection. It is the death of his illusion. And finally, if he does not do the work, he collapses back into unconsciousness, chasing another woman, repeating the same cycle. But the woman who knows her power does not get pulled into this loop. She understands that love is not about saving anyone. It is about witnessing without surrendering sovereignty. If you are this woman, you may have already felt the weight of his silence after you set the boundary. You may have sensed his obsession lingering in the unseen spaces, his thoughts circling back to you like phantom echoes. Do not mistake his fixation for love. Obsession is not devotion. It is self-avoidance dressed as desire. Real love happens when both people meet as whole individuals, not as half-completed souls begging the other to fill the void. And the man who learns this lesson finally will experience what Jung called individuation, the birth of true consciousness, where desire is not about ownership, but about mutual awakening. Until then, many will remain trapped in the shadows of their own unmet needs, naming women as temptresses when in fact, the real seduction is the fantasy of escape. The empowered woman holds no malice toward this. She simply knows better, and in knowing better, she chooses herself. Because the woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.